Everybody has had the experience of a lump in their throat, tightness in their chest, a knot in their stomach. These are all symptoms of an energetic blockage. So think of it this way. An energetic blockage dysregulates the nervous system. The nervous system being dysregulated changes our chemistry, changes our physiology, changes our ability to self-heal, and then we end up with symptoms like digestive problems, allergies, asthmas, pain patterns that don't go away, anxiety, the digestive system, the respiratory system, the endocrine system altogether, the cardiovascular system, the nervous system. All of these systems are built by one master system. And that master system is the flow of energy through our body.
My next guest, Dr. Sue Morter, is an international speaker, master of bioenergetic medicine, and founder of the Morter Institute for Bioenergetics. With more than 40 years of clinical experience, she is widely recognized for her work bridging energy medicine, neuroscience, and conscious-based performance.
So energy medicine is really talking about the quantum science, the quanta, energy that is smaller than what the eye can see, but even smaller than what we've referenced as the atom. These tiniest particles that our reality is made of are influenced by our conscious thought. We can create a vacuum with just a few randomly placed photons inside this vacuum. We can think a particular thought in toward that vacuum, and the photons rearrange. We can think a different kind of thought, and the photons rearrange accordingly. Our consciousness, our conscious focus of our attention has an ability to shape-shift physical reality. The power of thought and breath and attention and magnifying our focus has every ability to determine the function of livers and kidneys and colons and respiration and chemistries and our ability, most importantly, to operate as a creative influence in our lives versus operating on the defense, being a reactor and a victim to the circumstances that occur.
Through her energy code trainings, body awake yoga programs, and global retreats, she helps individuals shift from chronic stress and survival patterns into states of coherence, vitality, and embodied awareness. Let's welcome Dr. Sue Morter. Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Taz. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to pause and say thank you. Your messages, your shares, your stories are the reason we make Whole Plus. Every conversation here is about connecting the science, the intuition, and everyday life together so you can feel more like yourself again. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe or follow button. It helps us reach more people who need this. All right, let's begin. I am so excited about this topic. Let me tell you why, because we actually offer and have had in our practices at Whole Plus, a whole section of the practice is devoted to energy healing and energy medicine.
Wow.
But as a medical doctor, when I'm telling my patients about this, because I have a methodology by which I'm like, okay, I think you would really benefit, from doing some work in energy, I get like the blanks, right?
What is
like,
that?
What is she talking about? Okay, now she's doing that woo-woo thing that she does every now and then. So I'm so excited to have you on here because I want people to understand maybe the science behind energy medicine and energy healing, what it is and how we need to take it out of the woo-woo bucket and put it into the healing model. Because I know for a fact that, after all these years of working with so many people and so many patients, people get stuck. You can have the most beautiful diet and supplement plan and medications, and you can do all the surgeries and you can do all the things, but there's just that thing. There's that something
else
that is not being answered. And I feel like it's very important in the healing model. So I'm so excited you're here today.
Yay.
I'm excited for the audience to learn more about you and your work. And I know you have a book coming out as well in a few weeks. I'm really excited, to learn more about that. But before we get into all the details, talk to us about this. What is energy healing? What do we need to be thinking about, and your work in the field?
So energy medicine, energy healing is working with the basic foundation of everything. Everything is energy. Everything, the chair that we're sitting in is energy. It's just compressed energy. We know that in the laws of physics that all physical matter is energy compressed into form. And so are our bodies, and so are our thoughts, etc. They're just, our thoughts are less compressed than our bodies. We can change our mind faster than we can change our body, kind of thing. So energy medicine is really about making sure that that energy is flowing through the human system the way that it's supposed to. If it isn't flowing, if it gets stuck, we get locked up in terms of our symptomatology. Our systems don't work the way they're designed to. Digestion, filtering, cleansing, healing, these things aren't able to happen when the energy flow is blocked. So it's the same thing that acupuncture's been using for thousands of years.
Yep.
So it's a matter of us recognizing that we can get involved in getting that energy to flow again. We can enhance it ourselves with the use of our mind and our body and our breath working together. It begins to enhance and amplify our true natural state. And that true natural foundation is energy.
Yeah, it's so interesting because, Chinese medicine is 5,000 years old. Ayurveda is somewhere around that same age. Homeopathy has been in the picture. And all of those systems, in addition to many others, talk about energy as the foundation. And even the basis of Chinese medicine and acupuncture was around energy assessment and evaluation, right? Like,
Yes.
where's your chi? What do we need to do to get the flow of energy to happen again? Where did we lose that in the Western medical model? What happened there that we got so far away from it and got down into this very reductionist way of thinking?
I think that one of the things that happens is we in the Western world are attuned to energies that are more massive and dense and gross, not in a judgmental way, but just in massive amounts of energy. And so when energy shifts big in our lives, it gets our attention. We talk about the cosmic 2x4 that has to hit us over the head before we start listening to that inner voice that's been talking all along. And so as we have developed an acuity for these more dense energies, we lose touch with a subtle energy that is behind the scenes. And that subtle nuance is truly what allows us to tap into inner wisdom, that internal guidance that is always there. We just haven't dialed into the frequency where that is constantly flowing in our lives. So there's a term called pratyahara in Eastern culture that talks about we need to withdraw our senses back onto the self and not be so concerned with the outer world. And do I fit in? And am I doing it right? Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I getting approved of? Am I, all of the things that keep drawing us into the external world in order to find our wholeness and to really allow the integration that's supposed to be happening all the time. We have to withdraw our attention back inside, not just when we're in crisis, not just when we're broken open because of some big disappointment in our lives or a disillusionment that has us, reeling, but all the time to learn to live back on the self instead of really being pulled onto the bright, shiny things of life or the big, intensive circumstances of life that pull us outward.
What would you say to the people that say that, and they've told me this, so what would you say that when people say like energy medicine's not scientific, there's no science behind it? What's your answer to that?
So, I run an outcomes-based clinic for many, many years. I was in practice beginning in 1987. I grew up in a family where my father was a pioneer in energy medicine.
Oh, wow.
And so he was working with how energy flows through the body and how unresolved emotions impact that energy flow or stop it. And as I was growing up. And so consequently, I have never gone to the doctor in the traditional terms of what we know that to be and gotten a prescription for a medication for an ailment that I have had.
Wow.
And so I know that this works. I know that it is a very real thing. And my patients and clients over the years would definitely attest to that. It's an experience that really can't be argued with. And as quantum science has come onto the scene,
yes,
it is really, really pressing us to embrace the power of thought and the power of consciousness and what it does to influence our reality, not only our internal reality, but our external reality. And what it is that we are perceiving, where we are coming from is determining the life experience that we are having. And so science is showing us actually that we have the power to shift the expression of our own DNA. It shows us that we have the power to shift even our physical environment by looking at life at this very subatomic level. So energy medicine is really talking about the quantum science, the quanta, energy that is smaller than what the eye can see, but even smaller than what we've, referenced as the atom. We used to think the atom was the tiniest
Right.
particle of our reality. And then, the electron microscope shows us that, no, there's actually a whole world going on inside of an atom. There's subatomic particles that are making all that happen. And when we get small enough in that study, we can see that these tiniest particles that our reality is made of are influenced by our conscious thought. When we can create a vacuum with just a few randomly placed photons inside this vacuum. We can think a particular thought in toward that vacuum, and the photons rearrange.
Oh my gosh.
We can think a different kind of thought, and the photons rearrange accordingly. So what it shows us is our consciousness, our conscious focus of our attention has an ability to shape-shift physical reality, because those little photons are the tiniest little particles that when stacked together, they create substance that we are used to measuring in terms of atoms and molecules and so forth. So quantum science is bringing us into such a subtle reality of what is actually at cause of anything that's happening in our lives, that we can't deny that the power of thought and breath and attention and magnifying our focus has every ability to determine the function of livers and kidneys and colons and respiration and chemistries and our ability, most importantly, to operate as a creative influence in our lives versus operating on the defense, being a reactor and a victim to the circumstances that occur. Quantum science is saying, we're in charge of determining what's going to happen in this body and in this environment that we are operating in. We just have to learn how to do that. And the great news is we can.
I think it's amazing and a little bit frightening and scary at the same time that we have the power to change our DNA, right? Which means we also have tremendous amount of influence on the generations coming, after us, right? Because that DNA is transmitted, across lineages. And so I think there's a tremendous sense of responsibility, and there's also a tremendous sense of amazing, opportunity at the same time.
Yeah.
I think I did a TED Talk back, and nobody understood it at the time because I think this was still not like language that, people were using.
Right.
But I've always been fascinated by this idea of quantum energy, quantum medicine, love Chinese medicine, all these other things. But I did a TED Talk, I think it was 2017, and it was about the fact that maternal emotions are being stored in the mitochondria, which is an energy field, right? An energy source, and then being transmitted down generation after generation, largely unchanged, right? Largely unaffected by who your partner is with. And the reason I even started that conversation or did that TED Talk was because I was looking at our lineage, our matrilinear lineage. And, my grandmothers had stories of, being oppressed or not being able to express their voice or whatever else. My mom had similar circumstances. I was not necessarily oppressed, but I was raised in a chaotic home. And then comes my daughter, who definitely no chaotic home, super happy, privileged childhood. But everyone's had the same kind of look in their eye of insecurity, inability to maybe voice themselves or act, until they mature up. And so I was like, why is that? Like different experiences. And so this idea of locking your emotions within your physical body and how it transmits down is real. I've seen it play out over and over again. What are some of the patient stories where you've seen this idea play out in real time, where it has been more emotional locking, energetic locking, or blockages that have resulted in physical outcomes?
Oh my goodness. So, a diabetic that is really influenced by their immediate ability to metabolize, sugars in life, etc. Once she discovered that actually allowing her own disposition to be enough, to be whole and complete, actually her recognizing that there is a sweetness to life that she never really recognized. She was caught in survival all the time and was transferred from being raised by her parents to her grandmother raising her because of chaos in the home. And she grew up under those circumstances. Under those recognitions and us working with moving her energy back into its alignment and its integrated state, she began to recognize that she was okay. that she was safe, that she was whole and complete. And as a byproduct of that, not only was she able to reduce her insulin down to, a functional level and continues to reduce it, but also found that her eyesight was changing and that her disposition was changing at large, and her ability to actually be in a relationship for the first time in her life.
Wow.
In her 30s, to be in a successful, loving, dynamic relationship for the first time, all was a byproduct of her recognizing that she needed to bring her attention back onto self instead of being consumed on other and defensive physiology, a dysregulated nervous system, which we know so much about these days, but to recognize that there is an essence underneath all of that she had no idea existed. To find the true self, which sounds super esoteric, but it is a starting point that we all ultimately have to find.
Is there a category of illnesses, whether they are, something like diabetes or other autoimmune diseases, for example, or cancers or mental health conditions? I don't know. Is there a bucket or a category of medical diagnoses and medical illnesses that you found in practice is really an energy issue? It's really an energy medicine issue.
If we look at what science is showing us, and it says everything is energy, and I look at what my clinical experiences have been, it can all be traced back to energy blockages, whether it's a chronic degenerative disease or a case of migraine headaches or anything in between that we experience. It can all be traced back to a blockage in the natural energy flow that is intended to be happening through this body. That energy built this body. That energy is designed to be sustaining this body, to be healing it and replenishing and rejuvenating whatever happens in the course of living in our bodies and in our minds and in our conscious, personhood, our humanity.
Right.
And so if that energy is blocked, it ends up revealing in certain ways based upon the aspects of the energy at large that are blocked. For instance, we may have blockages in certain areas of our system that relate to our basic foundational survival instincts, our capacity to feel at home and safe, not even knowing what caused it. We might have been born to a mother that was wrestling with that during the pregnancy. That was the case in my world.
Right.
And in another level of our own consciousness, if the energy is blocked, it can inhibit our sense of creativity, our sense of our capacity to take something and make it better than, leave it better than we found it. That if we're not tapped into that part of us, then we become reactive and we search for environments that feel safe rather than recognizing that we can transform circumstances based upon our true identity. When we know who we are, we know we can move into these circumstances and shapeshift them. If we know that we're made of creative energy itself, and we know how to tap into that and allow it to literally pour into our life circumstances, it begins to shift our life circumstances. And so if other areas of our system are shut down in particular ways, we may be conditional in our loving. We may be hesitant if we've ever been suppressed or ridiculed or heartbroken or blindsided and all these things that happen in life. If we're operating as a compromised version of who we are, if we are operating as a defensive, protective, guarded version of who we are, then we're not operating as the creative essence, the creative quality that we're capable of expressing. So it depends on what parts of our energies are blocked and in which ways that will determine what sort of symptoms generate in the physical body, in the emotional component of our lives, in the mental capacities, even in the perception of self altogether. So many, many categories.
So basically any illness can be touched by this.
We're designed to be self-healing and self-regulating. And if we're not doing that, there's a reason. The average individual can be diagnosed with cancer 7 times in
Yeah.
their life. But the body is designed to take that up and transform it, to obliterate the cancer cells and replace them with new replenished ones. But what we're learning is that the energy field that is building the body and responsible for rejuvenating it, if that energy field isn't operating the way that it's supposed to, then those cells get to flourish out of control.
And grow, yeah.
And if the energy field is operating the way that it is built to operate, it moves in and rectifies the situation, and through its perfecting template, builds cells that are stronger than the ones that were, there before.
Fascinating. One of the things that somebody watching or listening to us today may be wondering, well, how do I know, out of everything that I'm dealing with today, how do I know that I actually have an energy blockage versus something else? Is there a way for them to assess themselves and to, understand, like, this is where it's coming from?
Yeah, there are so many things. The answer to the question is this energy or is it something else, would be it's energy.
Mm-hmm.
And it may have eventuated itself into some symptoms that are now replenishing or recreating a new expression. And so
Yeah.
they become a new cause that generates another problem, sort of a chain reaction. But you can trace it all back to an energetic flow. So how does somebody know? Everybody has had the experience of a lump in their throat, tightness in their chest, a knot in their stomach, a shrill up their spine, a defensiveness that they have a difficult time releasing, tension in the body. These are all symptoms of an energetic blockage. So think of it this way. An energetic blockage dysregulates the nervous system. The nervous system being dysregulated changes our chemistry, changes our physiology, changes our ability to self-heal, and then we end up with symptoms like digestive problems, allergies, asthmas, pain patterns that don't go away, anxiety, stresses, that seem unresolvable. That is a chain reaction. In our traditional medical model, we're out here addressing those symptoms,
Right.
and we take a medication to
Right.
try to cover it up so that we don't feel that way or that we don't have that pain, or et cetera. Or if there's an organ or system that isn't functioning right, we try to add to it or adjust or adapt. And I know that you are very inspired by, the idea of, well, let's not treat the symptom, let's get to the cause.
Right.
And so we move to these basic foundational systems in the body. But those systems, the hormonal system, the digestive system, the respiratory system, the endocrine system altogether, the cardiovascular system, the nervous system, all of these systems are built by one master system. And that master system is the flow of energy through our body. So if that master system is interrupted, not functioning the way that it could optimally, then that chain reaction happens. And we end up becoming aware of it way over here on the symptom level. But it can all be traced back to, why isn't the nervous system regulating itself? How does it get stuck? How do we get locked in a dysregulation of fight or flight and get locked there in the first place? And that can be traced back to, if the energy isn't flowing as a deep sense of self, a deep sense of knowingness of who we are, that we're okay, that we are whole and complete. We're full people. We're not broken. There's nothing missing. There's nothing wrong. Some of our wholeness has been suppressed or never had the opportunity to animate and to enliven and to express. And so we experience the consequences of that in terms of the symptoms that we end up going to the doctor for. And so if we can come back here and learn to feel and to breathe and to be positioned inside this system as we truly are meant to be, then we start moving this energy flow through the body from a sort of an essential self perspective, not a personality perspective, but an essential, true, authentic self perspective. When that starts to happen, things start to let go. Rigidities that we've held in our body because we were uptight and afraid and still reacting to that thing that happened when we were 10 or 15 or 25 or 35 for that matter. And so we start to sense and feel a melting into, oh my gosh, I had no idea that it could be easy.
So
Life could be in my favor.
I've heard you say a couple of things, and I want to make sure we're all tracking in the right direction. So, this idea of of being stuck energetically is then in turn creating nervous system dysfunction, which is sort of this chronic stress state, right?
Yeah.
And one of the ways it sounds like people can identify themselves as being in that particular place is just not feeling safe. It sounds like not feeling
Yeah.
safe in your body, not feeling, confident with who you are or what your purpose is or where you're lining out in the world, and being a little bit more externally driven than internally driven. Do I have that right?
Yes, yes.
That's what's sounding like, sort of like a quick screening tool for anybody who's like, well, do I need to go down this road? And the answer is probably yes for almost everyone, because almost everyone I meet nowadays is in a chronic nervous system overdrive, high cortisol state.
Right.
But I think these ideas of safety, focusing internally, being creative. Like, I think if your creativity is blocked and you're not able, to be innovative or creative or productive in your life and unique in individual ways that are authentic to you, those are all signs maybe and symptoms that the issue's way up here, not downstream with maybe a symptom like fatigue or brain fog or weight gain or some of those things that so many people talk about. As people, try to understand this idea of energy medicine and energy healing, and you've talked a lot about self-healing, what is the path to self-healing? Because as you've already mentioned, our thoughts can shift DNA. They can shift what's happening in an intercellular, environment. And again, I go to, that's amazing. And that's also really scary because oh my gosh, what if I have a bad thought? Like, what am I doing?
Right.
So, so how do we start to master this? How do we start to get our hands around it in a realistic, practical way where we're influencing energy in the right direction and, we are able, to sort of co-create, it sounds like, with ourselves?
One of the things that I feel is direly missing in our approach to self-healing is that we're losing touch with and embracing, allowing, nurturing disposition in the world. We've been pulled outside of ourselves so much that we're approaching everything like, okay, how do I deal with that? How do I deal with that? How do I deal with that? How do I get over this? How do I hack this situation? Or how do I, what's the little skill that I can do in this moment to be the quick fix? And what's deeply missing inside of it is our come from of our wholeness. So, for instance, you mentioned, what if I think a negative thought? Am I going to derail myself and now it's too late? And if I think a negative thought and I can embrace the part of me that is afraid or that is, being pessimistic or protective or guarded in some way, if I can, the moment that I experience myself thinking that way, if I can have compassion for that version of myself in this very moment, if I can recognize, wow, that feels extraordinarily protective and, edgy, and I'm very contracted. And when we recognize that contraction or the edginess thought or the words that are coming out of our mouth that are judgmental or, protective in some way, if we can immediately turn on the compassionate version of self for self. We think of in terms of compassion, like we should be compassionate for the other person, and then we won't judge them, and everything will be better. And that is true. And if we're judging someone else, it is a reflection of the judgment that's going on inside of ourselves that we aren't attuned to because it's more subtle than this outer world, this movie that we're walking through, where the inner world is being reflected to us. And this is another thing that quantum science is teaching us, that we can't see and feel and hear what's going on inside as easily, only because we're not attuned to it, because we can teach ourselves to do so. But in the meantime, we're very attuned to what's going on in the outer world.
Right.
So what happens in here and doesn't happen in here gets reflected in the movie that we're walking through in this life. So if I'm not kind to myself, someone's going to not be kind to me because that's how I perceive my value. That's when you do the math, that's how it's adding up. So life is reflecting back to us how we're secretly, stealthily treating ourselves on the inside, but we don't even know it because of this suppressed version of authentic self, true self.
Interesting.
So if I'm in an abusive relationship, my attention, of course, goes to how am I going to deal with this abuse? How do I navigate this? How do I survive this? Do I stay? Do I go? What do I do? And our attention is way out here. And once we get to safety and we begin healing, we begin to recognize, wow, I was doing that to myself long before they started doing it to me. I just didn't realize it. So when we walk ourselves back into this subtle awareness, we begin to become much more masterful in life because we can share compassionate moments with the self between the performing personality or the protective personality and the true essential soulful self, if you will, of who we are. And when we develop that sort of patience and internal presence and a loving relationship internally, it begins to be reflected in our external lives. It can't not, because the vibrational frequency that we're now emanating has changed. So let me just kind of reframe back to where we were. Everything is energy. And energy is vibrating in various frequencies, like radio stations. And if I'm dialed into country and western, I'm going to hear country and western. If I'm dialed into jazz, I'm going to hear jazz. So the same thing is true inside our whole operating system, this energetic master system. It's operating in a variety of frequencies. And if I'm dialed in to only a few, then that's what I experience in this abundant universe. Of all the things that can be experienced, I experience these kinds of things because I'm dialed in to a vibrational frequency where those kinds of things exist. So when I was in practice every day, and that's all I was doing, over the years, I recognized that I had certain patients, and maybe you've experienced this, I had certain patients that were always having accidents. They were falling off ladders. They were in car wrecks. There was something almost always going on in their life. You know, something was happening with a family member, a trauma crisis was always unfolding. And about 20% of my patient base accounted for about 80% of the accidents and incidents that were dramatic in my practice over a period of 20 years. And so I began to recognize, like, what is going on here? You don't just have bad luck. You're dialed into something in an unknowing fashion that is keeping you in a disconnected, disoriented reality. And so your system is emanating that vibrational frequency, and we literally attract and engage in ways that are limited in those same ways. It also shows up as different diagnoses, different disease conditions, different ways of dysfunction that our system will adopt to because of the incomplete bandwidth that we're dialing into. We're limiting ourselves by beliefs that we hold about ourselves at a deep, deep level. We're limiting ourselves by our disposition in the world because of that. If I believe at some deep level that I'm not enough, I'm going to take different actions, and I'm going to emanate different energies than if I finally begin to embrace, yes, I am enough.
So this
yes, I am.
ties back to this idea of manifestation and optimism and some of these other things that have floated around in our culture, where, the idea I'm going to manifest this or I'm going to make this happen, but then it doesn't happen. And I've had others explain that it's not happening because at that very deep level, you've not really reset the frequency or the radio station. So, my question is, how do we go about, like, if we can identify, which I feel like is the first part, right? Like identifying that this is your issue and this is really where to begin. Like, how do we go about resetting that, right? Because, we have a lot of people doing vision boards and manifesting and affirming, and affirmations are big. I have an 18-year-old who she's like, I'm doing my affirmations right now. Please don't come in the room, that type of situation.
Right.
So we've got a lot of all of that going on, but to truly impact this change down to the level of the DNA, like you've talked about, what needs to happen.
Yeah. A deeper felt sense of what it is, a felt sense of what it is we think we want or need. Because the true essential self doesn't want or need anything. It's completely whole. So if I'm sitting in a seat that thinks I need this, this, or this to be okay, I'm not operating in the seat of the true essential self. So here's how I kind of explain it. When we land here, we sort of splat, okay? And meaning that we forget who we are, we don't know, we're oriented in ways that are survival based. We're trying to figure out, what just happened, where am I, how do I please the big people?
Yeah.
I keep getting in trouble for doing this thing that I want to do. We're 2, we're 3, we're 4 years old, and we're orienting inside of this dispersed version of who we are, way out here on the periphery. And so out here on the periphery, we feel lacking because it's not the truth of who we are. And so we feel like something's missing because we're not in touch with the wholeness of who we are. And so in the course of life, little by little, we have the opportunities to pull ourselves back into center, where we've pulled back all of our resources, all the aspects of who we are, and we really get, by the time we're like 85, we get, hey, don't mess with me, honey, I've been there, right? And so we have this disposition that we've earned our way back into, I'm just going to be me, and you can deal with it.
Yeah.
And so along the way, lots of years in between there, we suffer. And we want, and we don't have, and we want to manifest. We want to change things. So my answer, and what I've been working with patients and clients to the tune of having really reached millions of people with this conversation, and been able to personally work with thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people, pulling these things back together again, recognizing there's a vibrational frequency to my wholeness that I don't operate as. So if I'm sitting and saying my affirmations, who's saying the affirmations? The one who wants, or the one who celebrates that they have that they already have it. It already exists. It's already here. I'm just not I'm not allowing it to be true. I'm not dialing into it. So then the rational thinker says, but it isn't true. I don't have it here. It's not in my life right now.
Right.
But on a deep energetic level, it is true. And the moment that we release our position in this protective or performing personality, so out here in the splat where we've dispersed, and sorry, I talk with my hands here.
Yeah.
So when we splat, we disperse, we're operating out here on the periphery. That's the personality version of us. The one who has some skills and some talents, and the one who's missing some stuff, and all that. So we grab a hold of that one and we go for it because it's all we know. And so we go through life, working from these things that people have given us feedback. Oh, you're so kind. You're so generous. And so we be more kind and generous because we get rewarded for that, and we keep operating in a performance-based world.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, that's not who we are. It's not all of us. And so we get 20, 30, 40 years into that, and we start feeling like, God, I'm getting tired. It takes a lot to do this. It's not inspired. I feel like I'm missing these things. So we learn about manifesting and saying affirmations and doing these things. So we start doing them from the seat of the personality. Okay? And so in the work that I'm doing is I'm inviting people to recognize that's just an operating system that you've been programmed into, that you tried it on for size, it worked, but what got you here won't get you to the rest of you.
Right.
And so to get to the rest of you, we got to drop in and remember who you were before you splatted. Remember who you were before you got dispersed, and to recognize that. So people work with meditation and breath work and coming into stillness and silence so that they're not always the doer.
Yeah.
And they develop the observing mind, the witness mind, and they start to witness life, and instead of just reacting to it, which is a beautiful step in the right direction. And when we develop that witness mind, we're getting closer back here. But ultimately, we're supposed to be using that witness mind, observing mind, instead of the thinking, analytical, strategizing mind always, to come back and use it on the inside, to witness the energies that are trying to move through my system by first noticing where those energies are stuck. I've had this knot in my gut for 15 years, somebody would say to me. And I'd say, yeah, that's where the rest of you is that you've been missing. If you would free up that energy that is locked up in the liver area or the pancreas area, or free up that energy that's around your heart space, or free up that energy that is locked in the hip that just doesn't seem to heal, or the energy that doesn't run down that leg, so you're always injuring that knee again and it never really heals, and it's been 15 years, etc. If we would free up the energy that is blocked in this body, we actually would begin to experience the rest of who we are. We would start to feel a sense of compassion, which is required to find that energy inside. We would experience a version of love that we've not known before, because a sense of wholeness starts to move inside this system that we never knew we had. It was in there, but we were way out here on the periphery in this performing personality or this protective personality, trying to make life happen, trying to get it to go. And we're exhausting ourselves doing that. That's why the nervous system is dysregulated. That's why the chemistry is off. That's why we're not healing. So when we come back and we begin with the end in mind, we begin as if it is true that I am whole. And we just do something like sit and breathe in the 5 minutes that you're waiting for, whomever to get ready to go to dinner, and you're sitting there like da, 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 da. So do something really productive in that moment and just start to pay attention to your breath. Start to pay attention to who's sitting there. Are you tense? Are you agitated? Are you controlled by your mind? Or are you mastering that situation and bringing your mind into your heart, breathing in your belly, stretching open some of those areas that are just chronically rigid,
tight,
because they're contracted for a good reason. They're not just inadvertently contracted.
So you talk about the importance of breath work, but you also mentioned the importance of posture. Talk to us a little bit about that, how posture connects to the flow of energy and to this sort of, inability to connect back to yourself.
Yeah. So if we were to pull all those energies back into our deep core and breathe life into that, we would be operating as someone who is whole and complete, who isn't afraid, who isn't here to prove anything, rather someone who is here to express and explore and create and engage and share. And that person has a different posture than the person who feels downtrodden, is exhausted, is overwhelmed with the stresses and the strains of life because they're preoccupied with the competitive scenario.
Right.
They think it's real. And so they act every day as if it is, which confirms that in fact it is. And because we continue to dial into that radio station, that's the world we're living in. And if we were to dial into a radio station that feels whole and complete, we would be experiencing more wholeness and completeness, but it has to be felt. And so if we assume, so here's what we know. If our consciousness is aligned and integrated, we automatically have shoulders that roll back. We have a chest that feels full on the inside and it's pressing us out. It's not that we're sitting up and sticking out our chest. It's that we're on the inside inflating a balloon, if you will, filled with love, if I could give it a vibrational frequency, that is pressing out into this world, here to express and to explore and to celebrate. So if we know that the consciousness does that to a body when it's plugged in, if we put the body in that position itself, as if we already are feeling that way, and then we move deep inside the body and start breathing with the love that would be present if we did know who we were, what begins to happen is we put ourselves in the neighborhood of the vibrational radio station where that can click into place.
Interesting.
So if we can learn how to squeeze certain muscle groups, move into certain positions, breathe in certain ways at the same time that start to encourage that energy to start moving again. But even if we start doing that from living in our head, we ultimately have to drop down inside this body, in the heart, in the gut, in the solar plexus that separates the two. If you think about this, our heart, we know, love, compassion, this divine ability to forgive and to begin again. And then we have below the navel, this wisdom center that is where, your deep gut feelings, your inner knowing resides in mass. There's a lot of energy in that area of consciousness. And so here's the problem. There's this blockage between the two at the solar plexus area where our personal power resides, our personal identity. So if I have the basic core belief that I'm not enough, that luck never goes my way, I wasn't born into the right, privileges and circumstances, we're contracted then with that belief. It's a very contracting disposition. Even if we weren't, it doesn't mean we can't have anything. So when we start to open that posturally and start to breathe in that area, we start to stimulate the part of consciousness that bridges our wisdom and our love. And it is so powerful. The Eastern culture would reference it as the power of 1,000 suns. That's a lot.
That's a lot. Well, you've written a book, Hidden Codes, right? The 5 Hidden Codes of Awakening. Tell us the name of your book. Do I have it correct?
Yeah,
The Anatomy of Awakening.
It's the Anatomy of Awakening.
And in the book, you talk about all these different codes. Can you walk us through those for a second in terms of what we need to understand as we are trying to come out of this, essentially?
Right. So, that's exactly why the book. I started recognizing that a lot of people would hear this conversation and feel like there's something in that. I don't know exactly what she's talking about, but I can feel that there's something in me that knows that I've been doing all the stuff, been saying all the affirmations, creating the vision board. I've been listening to and watching and reading and all of it. And this thing isn't happening. Maybe there's been some improvement, but I'm still not feeling this over the finish line kind of feeling. And so I started working with people in an organized fashion, starting as if with the end in mind, starting as if we'd already crossed the finish line. How would you feel if you had? How would you feel if you were already knowing your wholeness and your completeness? And so I start by recognizing you are at your very foundation a creator of your life. You are that. So I explain what that means and how we can begin to approach that. And I'm showing people in one of the first of the 5 codes that, let's start at the beginning. You are this unified field of consciousness that has come into body form. You are not just a human being. You are an energy being that is being human. In spirituality, they would say you're a spirit, you're a soul that is in this life journey. In terms of science, we can't really talk that way, but we do. We do when we get down to the brass tacks. We're like, what do you feel in your heart of hearts? What's your soul saying? We're there. So we begin to train people to recognize these vibrational frequencies that we have edged out. We bring in ideas like you're a sacred presence. You are made of wholeness. You are a rare presence on this earth, and to recognize your uniqueness and your importance of being, etc. And so we start to cultivate vibrational frequencies that we long ago pressed aside because it just wasn't necessary in my immediate environment. And when I'm splatted, when I'm all dispersed in my my survivorship. And so then we move into another code that recognizes that when we recognize these frequencies within ourselves, the precious, the rare, the intimate, the energies that we think are weak, that we have marginalized, we're just going to bring them back and take a look at them and feel into them. And people begin healing automatically simply because they're starting to vibrate internally. They're starting to dial into the radio station where wholeness exists. And we've pushed it aside in our tendency to survive, to be locked into fight or flight doing so. And so we move into, a code of taking aligned right actions, things that are true to us, to allow the enhancement of this true self rather than strategizing for the competitive edge. And what ends up happening is we end up unfolding in a way that is unwavering, that is steeped in wisdom, that is steeped in the deep truth of who we are and what we're doing here. So we're able to make decisions in those hot moments that aren't fear-based. And when we stop making fear-based decisions, we start living, actually, for the first time.
So in the book, you walk the reader through these different codes.
Yes.
And through this journey of coming back into self.
Yeah.
It's not fair to ask this question, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Is there a timeline for somebody when they start this journey? Like, what can they expect?
Yeah. I tried to put everything in there because I know
Yeah.
the impatient person who's like, okay, I'll give
What's
you
going
I'll give you a
on?
crack.
Right.
I'll give you 24 hours. here.
Right, exactly.
I'll give you a crack at
3
this.
seconds.
Yeah.
So, but
And
anyhow.
so I know that in a high-paced world, we need immediately results. And so I put practices in the book that show people what to do. In a hot moment, do this. And if you do that, you're going to see, oh, there's a shift. I get it. I can feel it. And then you'll give it a little more opportunity. And there are other practices in there that you can do while you're doing the dishes, while you're cleaning the house, while you're, whatever you're doing, living life. They're designed to be utilized and explored while you're living your life. So you don't have to carve an hour aside, to
Sit
do
on
this
the
every day.
corner. Yeah.
And if you want to, it will enhance even more. But people get results immediately. And the longer or deeper they go into some of the practices that are in the book, of course, as with anything, the more we devote our attention to it, the bigger it's going to grow. If we devote our attention to the stress in our life, the more it grows. If we devote our attention to the solutions that are inherent in our system, the more it's going to amplify and magnify, and the more we will feel those experiences. And so I have people that have been, it's a lifestyle that one can entrain themselves to live into. And it is also something that people can use for some quick fixes here and there in the moments. But here's what usually happens. People realize, I did that thing she said, and it did work, and I got it. So, maybe I'll pick up that book this weekend. And then they do, and they read a little bit more, and they just start to find their way in to themselves. And that's the point, right?
Yeah.
And so if we can just give it a crack, it begins to flood the space.
What are you hoping people will take away from the book?
That they discover who they really are. That they discover they have what it takes. That they are made to generate their own path. That they're not supposed to search for their true path. They're supposed to be able to feel and sense and generate their true path. They are original medicine.
And then what would you say to somebody today listening who might be fighting a chronic disease or has a new diagnosis or has a family member that they're fighting for? What would you tell them?
Yes. So in a moment's time, you can stop the momentum of a runaway train. In a moment's time, you reach up and you pull that little line, and all of a sudden the train starts to slow down. And the moment that happens, we're moving from this dysregulated, disoriented, chaotic version of ourselves into more and more a deep sense of stillness and wisdom that will be the healer that we turn on. The thing that I know is that this very essence that we seek for just reprieve becomes the animated healer within that we've been seeking. It is the rest of the story that the protective or performing personality cannot generate. We have to surrender that one into something else. The reason it's difficult to surrender is that we don't know who we are underneath that. What am I going to be if I'm not hanging on to that?
Right.
And so what this book is doing is cultivating what is underneath that, so that when you let go, you immediately feel that you're buoyant and that you're caught by the true version of yourself without feeling like you're just scrambling in the dark, on your own. It's quite the opposite of that. We start to feel super
fascinating. I could talk about this forever. Or for anyone interested or ready to go on this journey, where can they find the book? Where can they find you?
Oh, the book is where all books are sold at all of the all, and we also have it on my website. So that and if someone purchases it from our website, we can offer them additional support courses and things that bonuses that come with the purchase of the book, just to guide, because I know this conversation is very, very important for people to know that they're supported and they don't have to dive in wholeheartedly, but if they just edge their way
start somewhere
with a little bit, things begin to open and shift for a whole new reality. So
I think it's an
website.
important part. I've talked a lot about the 5-body model, where your energy is a part of the healing journey, and it needs to be accounted for, when we think about all the different aspects of health, So I feel like this needs to be in the medical model. We need to be thinking about it. We need to be assessing it. We need to be asking the questions about it, because it's hard to get people to fully heal and to get them where they need to be, regardless of what they're dealing with, if we're going to ignore this and kind of push this off to the side. So thank you so much for being here today.
Oh my
I
gosh, my
appreciate
pleasure.
it. And I want to ask you've mentioned it probably 4 or 5 times. You've probably mastered this at this point, but what makes you whole?
On the edge, always. I'm always looking for a deeper version of self. Yeah, there is, yes, I have a certain level of mastery with this that allows me to feel so much more at peace. I slept on the floor of my closet growing up as a kid. That's how terrified I was. I just wanted to look in one direction to make sure I was safe.
Yeah.
And the fact that I'm, highly functioning and out in the world and helping, millions of people is confounding to my mind in terms of how did that happen.
Yeah.
And so by sharing these things, it is, I know, a way for people to find their wholeness. For me, what makes me feel whole is when I find another thing that triggers me and I know what to do with it, and I am blessed by that very trigger when I do the work that's in this book. And when I know yet another day that is unfolding in and developing my ability to do that, it generates a sense of well-being and okayness, because I know that no matter what happens, I'm going to be fine. I'm totally here, enjoying and celebrating life, and knowing that nothing is bigger than what we are faced with. So
amazing.
It's a great job.
Well, it's been wonderful talking to you about this. Let me try that again. Thank you for taking the time to come here and be on the show today. And for everybody else watching and listening, remember, we post new episodes every week. We'll see you next time. Yeah. Before you go, remember, healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens in moments. If today's episode gave you one of those moments, subscribe and keep learning with me. The next video is right here, and it picks up right where this one left off.